Recording in progress.
You don't have any sound, do you?
No. Just the sound of my voice. Thank you so much. You may remember, and maybe you won't, in January during the Education Sunday, something that we were talking about prompted Matt to say, well, a good topic would be to talk about clothes. And as soon as he said that, several other people offered suggestions about what that could involve. Somebody said Mormon underwear.
Okay.
And somebody else said clerical collars. And I thought, this is a wonderful idea. And so I've been working on it pretty much ever since. And we will, if we have time, get to both Mormon underwear and clerical collars, but a whole lot of other stuff. As we're going to make the point, and like I always say, huge amounts of information could be presented on this. And we will just pick and choose and go as far as we can. So first of all, let's talk about what clothes are. Why do we wear clothes? And there's practical reasons, like you can see, like protection from weather and protection from physical situations like manual labor. You might need to wear gloves or certain steel-toed shoes or something like that, and also meeting society standards for modesty. All of these are practical reasons for wearing clothes. But what's really interesting are the cultural reasons for this. And believe it or not, cultural geographers, of which I am one, or was, I guess, I'm not really sure.
Still are.
Maybe I still am. Cultural geographers are interested in what culture means. And very, very few things that humans do or that we have mean as much and has as many meanings as clothes do. And so clothes are something that cultural geographers care about because it says a huge amount about culture. And so here's just a partial listing of the cultural ramifications of clothes, marking societal status and relative wealth, for example. This is where you get into brands, and certain brands somehow become trendy, and certain people, you have to wear that brand or else you're not hip or whatever. I mean, all of this stuff is the meaning that goes along with clothes. Personal expressions of identity. I am who I am, and these clothes express that, and I want the world to know. And along with clothes go hairstyles. That's a whole different topic, but hairstyles are also huge in this expression of identity. Membership in a group. Teresa's wearing a shirt that says Community of Christ on it, and you've got Outreach International, and so connections to groups. And of course, it seems like everybody is wearing a shirt that has some sports team on it, because they connect with that group, the idea. Advertising, it's amazing. Something which I have never understood is why people are so eager to do advertising for corporations on the clothes they wear. It's just a remarkable. But they do that because advertising creates meaning, and you want to be associated with the meaning that the advertising has created. So you wear that shirt that has the advertising on it, and you pay them for that privilege of advertising their product. It has never made sense to me, but people do it all the time.
One of the things that I noticed traveling is I wouldn't say a uniquely American thing.
It's mostly American.
It's mostly American. When
It
I
is
travel
mostly American.
Overseas,
You don't see that.
I don't see Austrians wearing advertising. I don't
Yep.
see Russians wearing it. I don't see Chinese wearing it.
That is absolutely true. In my experience, it's true also. You just don't see that in other countries. Americans have indeed put almost all of their identity into capitalism. And that is what we are. We will give up anything except capitalism. Well, that's not true, guns. We probably won't give up guns. But, and capitalism, that's an expression of capitalism, is that business that we're willing to advertise for corporations.
Which means it's really easy for people to know that's an American.
That's an American. Yeah. Clothes also are a means of exercising power and creating social control of groups. This is something which has been done to women for a very long time. Women have been controlled by the expectations of what clothes they wear. And that's a whole nother topic that we could spend hours on, probably. And I used to, in lectures, go on and on about that. So that's a whole nother topic, okay? So those are all some of the cultural things, and there's, I'm sure, dozens, hundreds more, but that's some of them. Religious clothing also goes way beyond practical stuff. It's not just covering you up. It has meaning. And so we're going to talk mostly about the connection to religious clothing, and we're going to look at some of those meanings. So let's start with this. One of the roles of sacred clothes is to designate the person as not secular, okay? I'm a religious person, and they want people to know that. And it may be a professional clergy, you know, who needs to identify themselves, and there's some functional, practical use in that. Because there's times when you're out in the world as a professional clergy, you need to be able to get access or to receive sort of considerations that maybe normal people don't get, and you need to be able to identify yourself as a professional clergy. But it's also people who are lay people often wear religious messages on their clothes. And almost always they view this as doing missionary work. You know, I'm going to let the world know I love Jesus, or whatever it is. And that's, again, more common in the United States than in other countries. Other countries just don't put a lot of words on their shirts. You know, we do it all the time. And almost everybody wears those kinds of shirts. But most other countries don't do that nearly as much. So here we have a Taoist priest who's ministering in a temple in China. And this guy here is one of the penitents. He's one of the worshipers. And notice he's also expressing himself by wearing his best clothes. And that's a common thing. A lot of people think that God is, or the gods, or however you want to think of the divinity, needs to be flattered in a sense by wearing your best clothes possible. You know, and this has been a really long tradition in churches all around the world. Excuse me.
Including in ours.
Oh, especially in ours. Especially in ours. Yeah.
Back in the day.
Back in the day, and not so much now. We're going to get to that a little bit, if we have time. We're going to get to that a little bit later on. So here's a woman in Argentina wearing Our Lady of Guadalupe on her shirt. It's a Catholic icon. It's a really important concept in Catholicism, especially Latin American Catholicism. And it is ubiquitously seen in Latin America, and she's, you know, expressing her opinion, her identity on that. This guy in Guatemala is wearing a shirt which has John 10:10 on it, or at least part of it, which says, "I come that they may have life and have it abundantly." And he's wearing that around because he wants people to know, first of all, that he's a Christian, but more than that, he wants people to know he's an evangelical. This is an evangelical thing to do. Catholics don't do this very much. Evangelicals do this. And the whole concept of abundant life is an evangelical concept. It's huge in the evangelical movement to talk about abundant life. And it has leaked over into Christianity in general, mostly in the United States again. So much so that our theme at the last Sunday in April is living abundantly, which we had borrowed that concept from. I'm sorry, I've got tickle. Yes, that would be nice. Thank you, Chris. I've recently been bringing water and I forgot to do
We
it.
have one block.
I have a water in the fridge ready to go and I just walked off and left it, so. Excuse me. So anyway, this guy wants the world to know he's not only a Christian, but an evangelical. And in Guatemala, that's contested space. About half the country is Catholic right now, and about half the country is evangelical. And there's been evangelical is growing at the expense of Catholicism, and it's sort of like a battle, not a physical battle, but you understand how that works. The second role of sacred clothes is to remind the wearer of their connection to the divine as a symbol of their sacred way of life. There's lots and lots and lots of ways. People wear crosses are doing that basically, and there's just huge amounts of ways that people do this. Two examples I came up with, these are common non-Christian examples, are the thread, the janu, that Brahmins in Hinduism wear underneath their shirts. And thank you so much. Oops.
They're very cool.
I can tell. Anyway, Brahmins are the highest order of caste in Hinduism, and they are allowed to wear this thread, and nobody else can wear it. So it's also a status thing. But the Brahmins are the priestly caste in Hinduism. And they wear this thread that you can see, whoops, you can see the guy here, the thread, and he has it in his prayerful hands. He's praying, of course, and he has it wrapped up. It's like, in some ways, it's sort of like, rosary beads.
Yeah.
But it has a different kind of idea, too, because all Catholics can have rosary beads. Only Brahmins can have the janu. It's a symbol of their second birth and initiation to Vedic learning. The Vedas are one of the scriptures. There's 3 scriptures in Hinduism, and the Vedas are one of the oldest of them. And the Brahmins are deeply invested in Vedic scriptures. And it's also status. As I said, only Brahmins can wear them. For Jews, another example is the phylactery. Phylacteries are little boxes which they attach to their heads and their arms usually. This guy's got one on his head and one on his arm. And what they do is they put little scriptures in there. And the idea being that you have the words of God close to your brain for your spirit and your thinking, and also attached to your arm for your doing, for reaching out and ministering, And so it's very symbolic, and a lot of, especially Orthodox Jews, wear this. They also wear yarmulkes. As you can see, he's wearing one here. We're not going to talk about that, but that's a little headpiece that they wear. And almost all Jews, at certain times at least, wear that. Some really conservative and really devout Jews wear it all the time. So, but some wear it on holy days or when they go to synagogue or something like that. So let's talk about the Garden of Eden. Let's talk about the Bible, okay? The Garden of Eden,
There was no clothes.
we're getting to that. The Garden of Eden is the representation in the Bible of God's perfect place on earth. It is perfect. We can't stress that too much. Before the fall, before sin entered the garden, it was perfect. So much so that God lived there. Okay? And God walked around in the garden and walked and talked to Adam and Eve and so forth. There was no violence, no death, no pain, no sickness, no hunger, no hatred, no cold, no unpleasant weather, no dangerous situations, and no reason for modesty. None of this existed in the Garden of Eden. It was a perfect place. And one of the evidences that the scriptures have of the perfection of Eden is that people did not wear clothes. And they're suggesting very strongly that this is the perfect situation, not to wear clothes. Partially because there's no practical reason for wearing them. That's what this is all about. But also because the logic is that, excuse me, if you believe that God created people and created them in God's image, then the the body and image of people, gosh, I don't know what's wrong with my throat today. I just want to sit here and cough for the next half hour, I think. The idea was that the body of people is perfect because it was made essentially from the body of God. And so there's no shame in a perfect body. And the body is perfect. And that's expressed in Eden in this scripture, Genesis 2:25, and the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. Okay? There was no shame in that. Now, what this clearly indicates is, in the very next scripture, is when sin enters the garden. Okay? And so what this indicates is the shame we feel, the need to be modest, the shame we feel with our naked bodies is a product of sin. And it's only because we're sinful that we feel that way. Okay? So in other words, humans developed this idea based on the knowledge of sin. And after eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the man and the woman, and then this is Genesis 3:10-11, heard the sound of God in the garden and were afraid because they were naked and hid themselves. This is not something they ever did before. Okay? God said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" And of course the answer was, yes, we did. And so because sin entered their lives, they had shame. And they had to cover themselves up. And that's where clothing, according to the Judeo-Christian and Muslim traditions, that's where clothing comes from. Okay. So because of that, well, you can see it in art. The representations of the Garden of Eden before sin show, this is typical of that, show them naked and show the perfect conditions here, in which the animals all live together, there's no violence, there's no death, there's nothing like that.
And they had turkeys in the garden.
And they had turkeys, and somebody counted, there's something like 200 animals, different animals. This was painted, by the way, by this Johann Wenzel Peter, who I did not know until I was poking around with this. But it turns out he was the most influential and important animal painter of his age. And so he loved this topic because he could put all the animals he wanted to, and he put something like 200 of them in there.
Just noting that the turkeys were in the Garden of Eden and somehow got from there to the New World.
Yes, they did. And in fact, there's a number of animals. Well, we won't go into that right now.
Koalas in
After
there? Kangaroos?
after sin entered the garden and there was shame, this is the kind of representations you get. This is a 19th century engraving based on an illustration and so forth and so on, in which Adam and Eve are clearly ashamed and they have covered themselves now. And here's God who is about to lower the boom on them. Okay?
Yeah, he's got clothes on.
Yeah.
What's God afraid of?
I was wondering about how to approach that, because the logic is that God would have been naked in the garden as well.
Yeah.
But don't think I've ever seen The only naked God I've ever seen is Michelangelo's creation of man, creation of Adam. And that's justifiable because at that point, Michelangelo's channeling that scripture that says everybody was naked in the garden, even though the people were outraged. And I think the reason we don't see God naked is because people would be outraged. But we do see Jesus naked.
They scare all the animals away.
They scare all the animals away. So medieval art often shows Jesus being baptized while either naked or wearing almost nothing. And so we have these from the 1300s, 2 images of Jesus being baptized. Everybody else has got clothes, Jesus doesn't. Okay? But as time goes on, we start seeing them clothing Jesus as societal standards on modesty and nakedness change. This is from the 1600s, and Jesus is wearing this, and now a recent one, Jesus is completely dressed, okay, which is, of course, how we want to think of Jesus now. But the reason why this was done was because baptism is, of course, fundamental to Christianity. You all know about baptism. But it's an expression of perfection. In that instant, you're perfect. And the perfect condition for Christians is to be naked. That's what the garden scripture says. And so it made sense to have Jesus be naked, and in the early Christian church, converts were often baptized naked. Because at that moment, they were perfect. Okay? But the reality is, all through the Bible, people wore clothes. Okay? So let's take a look at what they wore. What people wore during biblical times. Okay? And as it turns out, during most of the Bible's times, these kinds of clothes didn't change much. It was more or less similar. It changed some, but more or less similar. And so men's clothing, there's an inner garment. This is a close-fitting shirt, which is long, and it's often translated as a tunic. So when you see tunic in the Bible, it's usually referring to this. Made of linen or wool, the quality of which depended on your social status, because you could have really nice inner garments or you could have really crummy inner garments. Usually it had no sleeves and came down to the knees, although later they got longer and had sleeves. So there was an evolution of style on these garments. People, sometimes when they say that people were naked in the Bible, they mean that they were wearing just the inner garment. Their underwear, basically, is what this amounts to. This is the underwear. On this representation, this is the inner garment that the guy's wearing. This is, of course, a modern photograph of people who are dressed up, cosplaying Bible clothes, okay? And it's more or less accurate, although there are some problems with it. But this is the inner garment. And this has long sleeves and comes down to the knees. This guy's is not visible because his outer garment covers it up completely. But poor people often dressed with just their inner garment in warm weather because it was more comfortable. Rich people apparently always wore an inner and an outer garment. So the outer garment is a large square of cloth. It's just a big square. It's often called in the Bible in translation a coat, a robe, or a mantle wrapped around the body. It always has two corners of fabric are in front like this. This guy's pulled it shut and tied it with a belt. This guy has it open, which I assume they wore it both ways. Poor people use this as their sleeping blanket. So in the parable, in the story about if somebody comes, in Mark, and he's talking about if a soldier demands your coat, give him your cloak as well. What he's basically saying is give away your outer garment which for poor people would be a real burden because they wouldn't have a blanket and they wouldn't have any protection against clothes, against the weather. But basically, the way this function is, we would call that a dress today. It basically looks like a dress, you know. The one problem with this, as an aside, is that he's wearing a purple outer garment. And under no circumstances would this have ever been purple. Never. For two reasons. One, purple dyes were way too expensive, and almost nobody could afford them. And two, and more importantly, it was a violation of Roman imperial law. You know, purple was the color of the emperor, and so only extremely high-ranking imperial representatives and the emperor could wear purple, which means at the time, this is supposed to be representing in Jesus' time, Pontius Pilate was the only person in Palestine who was authorized to wear purple. Nobody else was. Something which is often translated as a girdle is just simply a belt to fasten the two garments. So they both got girdles on. Sometimes the girdles were a little broad, and they could fold it so that it made like a purse. So when they talk about Judas had the purse for the disciples, they're talking about his girdle was folded in such a way that he could put money in there. And that becomes the wallet or the billfold or whatever you want to call it. Women's clothing was very similar to men's clothing. Inner garment was virtually exactly the same. The outer garment was a little different. It was longer, and it allowed the woman to tuck it up over the girdle and still preserve her modesty, to use as an apron. So they would bring it up and tuck it in, and that would protect the front of the clothes. But it's essentially as a dress. Now these are a little more stylized. These, of course, is a modern photograph of people cosplaying Bible dress.
That looks like AI generated.
I think it's AI generated, yeah. And so you worry about that because AI lies and lies and lies and lies. So you worry about that a lot. But basically, they had these long dresses like this, and they had girdles like this, and so forth. So the one thing that women had that men didn't was a veil. And when you show biblical women nowadays, in those times, they always have veils. They always have a veil. That's how you know it's a biblical woman, is they have a veil. That is not realistic. Women did not wear veils all the time in the Bible. The wearing one emphasized a woman's modesty because the hair was considered especially sexy, and we'll get to that in a minute when we talk about Islam. But it often signified that she was unmarried. So essentially all women wore veils during worship, but not necessarily outside of that. Only in certain circumstances or to create certain cultural impressions would they wear a veil outside of worship. I dropped a slide here. Anyway, I was going to also mention that sandals were the basic footwear for men and women. They were usually just a sole with a thong that comes up between the toes or around the ball of the foot, whatever. So when John the Baptist said, "There's one coming after me, I'm not worthy to even unloose the thong of his sandal," that's what he's talking about, is that part. The other thing I was going to mention was jewelry. People wore jewelry if they could afford it a lot, but it's expensive. And men and women both wore jewelry, rings, and including piercings and things like that. Bracelets were worn by both as well. Women wore necklaces more than men did, but there was a lot of jewelry going on if they could afford it, though. Of course, Jesus' parents probably didn't have a lot of jewelry because they couldn't afford it. Now, what about women's clothing in the Middle East today? This was one that was brought up about women, Muslim women wearing the veils, okay, in our discussion in January. So I want to make sure I included this. The way Islamic women dress depends on a bunch of things. Islam is not one kind of religion everywhere you go. There's all kinds of varieties of Islam. And all kinds of people who respond to it in very different ways, okay? So it depends on where they live, how traditional that society is, and what their version of Islam is. It also depends on how traditional the woman is and what version of Islam she follows, okay? It depends on the occasion they're dressing for, and in some cases on how old the woman is. Here's a good example of this. Teresa and I have a friend who married a Tunisian fellow, and she went to Tunisia, and she took a bunch of pictures, and she knew about my passion for photography, so she shared them with me, and bless her heart for doing that. And this was the family of her husband. These two women are both in the family of her husband. These are related, closely related women, and they live in the same place and in the same context. And this woman wears a traditional clothes, and this woman does not. And they have no problem with that. They get along fine, and they're talking to each other, hanging out, and so forth. So it kind of depends on the individual and the society in which they live. But the traditional dress, this kind of dress, comes from interpretations of the Quran, which of course is the sacred scriptures of Islam. And it's clear that both men and women are supposed to be modest and sexually chaste, and the clothing is supposed to reflect that. So in the Quran 24:31b, they have this scripture, women should draw their coverings over their necklines and not reveal their charms except to their husband. This is an Arabic word, charms, which we translate that way because we don't have an exact equivalent in English. But what it means was any part of the woman that would arouse lust in a man. Okay? So a major reason why traditional Muslim women wear headscarves is because a woman's hair is considered especially sexy. This is a Middle East thing. And it was true for Jews, it was true for early Christians, it was true for Muslims. The hair is considered to be especially attractive and a charm. And charms are also defined as something which should only be seen by a woman's husband. So, but this predates the Quran. I mean, this goes way back, way before the Quran, before Islam even existed as a religion. And they're just part of that cultural tradition. Okay? So, the way Muslim women today interpret this scripture in the Quran ranges from this woman who doesn't cover her hair at all, all the way up to, there's three basic ways that people have interpreted this. So the hijab looks like this, and it's a head covering which covers the front of the chest. The niqab is a hijab with a face covering, so only the eyes are visible. And then there's the burqa, which is the entire body covering. And these are rare, really rare. They don't find them much in the Middle East. I think they were more common in the past, but they're not much now. These are more common. The hijab is the standard, basically. But that's how they are trying to hold to that scripture in the Quran. What do they do when they go swimming? I found many examples. If you type Muslim bathing suits into the internet, you get page after page of these. But these are examples of a traditional Muslim woman would wear these when they went swimming. Okay? This has become the symbol of Islam for a lot of people. Are there any questions or discussion about this? They just take that scripture seriously. At least traditional people do. But not all Muslim women do. I had a student whose mother was Iranian and her father was American, and so she was half and half. And her mother often went back to Iran to visit her family, and she always wanted my student to go with her. My student's a woman, I didn't mention that, she's a woman. So she often wanted my student to go with her and meet her family, and my student refused to do it because she refused to cover up. She refused even to wear a hijab because it was not part of her identity, to do that. So she would never, I was thinking, I would have gone to Iran if I had to wear a hijab, just to see it, to be there. But she refused to ever go. And so as far as I know, I've lost touch with her, of course, after the years have gone by. But as far as I know, she's never went to Iran. Yeah.
There's a gal from work, she's a Dubuquer, and she married a wonderful guy from Sudan. And because of that relationship, he's Muslim. And she, I think, she now wears a hijab normally, and that's like she wears it to work and all that, which is a bit. It's unusual. I would say it's unusual because she's a Dubuquer, so she looks and sounds like a Dubuquer, but she's wearing her hijab, and it's nice.
Did you notice that the woman from Darlington, who was a journalist in the Middle East that was just captured and released, photos of her in the Middle East, she's wearing a hijab as well. And she's, of course, a farmer's kid from Darlington or something like that,
They wear them sometimes for their safety when they're over there. For their safety.
In what way?
Like if we go over there, would we wear
Oh.
something as our safety?
It depends on where you go, but yeah, there's certain circumstances you should definitely wear a hijab at least.
Yeah.
I think that's safe to say, yeah. But they wear it largely for their husbands because it's a disgrace on the husband if the woman doesn't. It's like she's flaunting her charms to the world and not reserving them just for her husband. It's a religious statement. It is absolutely a religious statement. She was not Muslim. Yeah, she would not say that. You're right. She was really religious at all, but yeah. But that's not true throughout all the Middle East. It's true only in certain countries. It depends entirely on where you are. So.
And I think something to realize is the impact that it has on the person to wear your religious clothing. So the impact that how people feel when they put on, say, the hijab or the burqa or whatever, that really does impact how they're feeling and their relationship with the world around them. And I'm reminded of one of the classes I did not take. It wasn't a class that I had to take in seminary, but there was a class that some of my friends took where it must have been obviously a religion class, but where they got to wear hijab, like they got to wear those in class, and they talked about the impact that really had in just putting it on even initially. So when you start wearing those every day, like it affects how you interact with the world.
It does, and it affects your identity as a Muslim. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of religious women in the Middle East who wear these, they would no more think to go outside without a hijab on than any woman here would think to go out without a shirt on or something like that. I mean, it's just not something you wouldn't even think to do.
Mm-hmm. But on the same way, when you think about, say, the burqa, right?
Yeah.
there is a veil between you and the rest of the world.
Right.
Too, right? Like, that is the
And this is repressive of women in ways that this is not. So, absolutely. But like I said, burqas are really rare. As far as I know, the only place where burqas are still being worn very much is in Afghanistan. But I don't think they're even ubiquitous there. So. What about Judaism and Christianity? Okay, both Judaism and Christianity came out of the same cultural religious tradition as Islam. And they had the same culture and same religion driving them. And so both Judaism and Islam, Judaism and Christianity have injunctions against women who have their head bared, just like the Quran did, In Judaism, it's implied, there's a whole bunch of scriptures here which imply that, for example, before meeting Isaac for the first time, Rebecca covered herself with a veil, which demonstrated propriety and modesty for her future husband. So it's implied there that you should do that. In Numbers, a ritual in which a woman suspected of adultery had her head uncovered implies that a covered head was a normal condition for a respected married woman. Uncovering her head was a mark of public shame. Okay, and so forth. This is a cheat because this story is not in the Jewish scriptures. It's in the Christian scriptures. Isaiah prophesies shame on Babylon. Uncover your locks, your hair. Make bare the leg, uncover the thigh, linking, exposing the body with disgrace. And then in Song of Songs, which leaves nothing to the imagination, a woman's hair is explicitly linked to her beauty, and in 5:7, the removal of the veil by abusive men is a sign of great shame. So you get a lot of implications in Judaism that veils uncovering is the way it's supposed to be. So some Orthodox Jewish women still cover their heads, but not all. Certainly not all. It was more common in the past. In Christianity, though, it's much more, it's not implied. It's a law. And it comes from 1 Corinthians 11. Any man who prays or prophesies with something on his head shames his head because his head is Christ. But any woman who prays or prophesies with her head unveiled shames her head. Her head is the husband. So it's the same logic as what the Muslims have, that the shame is on the husband if they're uncovered. Okay? It is one and the same thing as having her head shaved. For if a woman will not veil herself, then she should cut off her hair. But if it's shameful for a woman to have her hair cut off or be shaved, she should wear a veil. In other words, wear a veil, is what they're saying. Judge for yourself. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head unveiled? Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is dishonoring to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory, for her hair was given to her as a covering. This is overt. And it has inculcated itself deeply into Western culture, in Christian Western culture, so that I have an example here in World War II. Once the war was over, French women who were guilty of or thought to be collaborators, usually if they had a German boyfriend, is what it amounted to. They would be brought out and had their heads shaved in public as a way of shaming them. So the head shaving is still a mark of shame, at least it was at that point. But for the most part, Christian women now simply just ignore this. It's right there in the scriptures, but they just ignore it. And it was enforced more in the past, but if any Christian woman thinks about this today, and most don't, but if they did, they would they would assume their hair itself is the veil, and they're covered. Okay, they don't have to worry about it. And there's nothing wrong with short hair, although it says explicitly that women should wear their hair long. So, take that for what it's worth. So the hijab and all that kind of stuff is just because the Muslims take this injunction more seriously than Christians do. Current examples. Well, the first half of the 20th century, if that counts as an current example, women often, almost always wore hats to church if they could afford a hat at all. But most of them could in one way or another. Especially on Easter, which is the most holy of Sundays. So we have my Blessed Mother here and my blessed little face here in the mid-50s, and my mom's wearing a hat. She didn't wear a hat to church all the time, but she did a lot of the times, and she always did on Easter. And she dressed her beloved son in a little hat for Easter too, because I was so darn cute. I'm sure that's what. There was no religious imperative here. She just thought it was cute.
Possibly.
Whoops. And my sisters all had hats. All of them did.
Looks like she's just trying to protect you from the sun, right?
It could be. It could be. I didn't have a lot of hair then or now or ever. So some very conservative women still cover their heads when they attend church or when they pray at home, especially in the South. This is more common in the South than it is any place else in the country. So here's a couple of Southern women who are going to church with really elaborate hats. In the black churches, they have really amazing hats, which are called church crowns. And so a lot of black churches, a lot of the black churches are very conservative. And so the conservative black churches, I should say, not all of them, but the conservative ones, they have these amazing crowns which they use to cover themselves. I don't know. You're not snuggling up in the pews, that's for sure. How do you see over that? Other very traditional denominations expect women to cover their heads at all times, like this. These are Amish women, and they always wear bonnets, at least in public. And I don't know what they wear at home. I'm sure they don't sleep in them or bathe in them or anything like that, but I don't know if they wear them around the house or if it's just in public. Anybody know?
I don't know. My guess is they're going to wear them everywhere except outside the bedroom, like inside.
That's my guess is too, but it's just a guess. But two guesses makes a truth.
Better than the internet.
Women wearing pants. In Western cultures until probably the 1950s, it was unheard of for women to wear pants in public. I assume they might have at home and they're farming or they're working on the farm or whatever, but in public they just simply did not do that. A storm of criticism would occur, and in some cases they would be arrested. Because this is an example of the use of clothing as a power dynamic. Men insisted that women not wear pants because it infringed on a male prerogative. And it was seen as an attack on male dominance of society and male authority. Who wears the pants in the house? See, that expression, you know. So I thought we'd talk about Katharine Hepburn for a moment. Katharine Hepburn is widely regarded as the first public figure to regularly wear pants, which she did in public in the 1930s. She got roasted for this. There's one anecdote which I ran across in which her studio was so outraged by this. She was an actress, of course. So outraged by this, they stole her pants. And rather than put on a dress, she walked around in her underwear until they gave the pants back. That's how strongly she felt about this. She was very emancipated, very liberated, and she was not going to put up with this foolishness, you know. Katharine Hepburn, by the way, is regarded by the American Film Institute, which is probably the best organization on the planet to make these kinds of assessments, as the greatest female actor ever in films. So she was really really good. And despite that, in the late 30s, she suffered a career slump as people started reacting against her attitudes, including wearing pants. And for a while, she had trouble getting roles, even though she's the best actor ever. That's how strong this was. All this is based on Deuteronomy 22:5. A woman must not wear men's clothing, and a man must not wear women's clothing. Anyone who does this is detestable in the sight of the Lord your God. I find that a hard scripture to believe, but nevertheless it's there. Yes.
So how did we get from the men wearing dresses to the men wearing pants?
Well, let's point out.
They were wearing dresses.
Let's point this out, and we'll come back to we can discuss that. But the cultural assumption was that pants were men's clothing, right? But as we pointed out, in biblical days, they didn't wear pants, particularly they wore dresses. So, it's hard to understand this logic. And I don't know, to answer your question, I don't know what the evolution of that was. At some point, pants are just more functional, and they're easier to do anything in than dresses are. And so men started adapting that because it fit what they were doing. And I don't know exactly how that worked. It happened in the medieval times, I think. Maybe even before, I don't know. So I don't know the answer to that. But that, what? Oh.
It doesn't mention pants, it just says.
It says men's clothing. So, and since men's
Identifies it as man.
and women's clothing were very similar at the time, so.
Would be the only thing I
That's
can
what
think
I
of.
was like.
What identifies it.
You can wear a short dress if you're a man, but you can't wear a long dress.
Maybe that was it.
That's the only thing I can
It
think
could be,
of.
because a lot of men's clothing went to the knees, and a lot of women's clothing went longer. Maybe that's the difference, I don't know. But it's based on religion. And so there was a burst of women wearing pants in World War II, and they were doing factory work, which made a lot of more sense for them to wear pants. And since it was patriotic, everybody cut them some slack. But when the war was over, there was this notion that we wanted to get back to normal, and so women faced a lot of pressure to go back to dresses and not wear pants. But the genie was out of the bottle at that point, and women realized that pants made so much sense. And so gradually, by the end of the 60s, of course, as you all know, it was really common for women and girls to wear pants in the United States. But not in school. School dress codes, another manifestation of how power can be used to control people with clothing. School dress codes in the 60s. I don't know if everywhere did, but many, many places you could not wear pants if you were a girl. Or blue jeans if you were a boy, by the way. I never once wore blue jeans to public school, as far as I know, because certainly not in high school, because it was banned. I could wear white jeans or black jeans, but not blue jeans. Yeah. So the prohibition against pants for women was based in scripture, so conservative religious women are particularly opposed to pants. And to the extent that this is still the case today for some, only a minority, a small minority, but some really traditional conservative women still refuse to wear pants, even today. In my years of doing the Western field trip, I had 2 different students who followed that edict. And if ever you need to wear pants, it's what we were doing in the West. You need to wear pants. And here's one. She wore dresses all the time. The other one, I hate to start telling stories, but the other one had gone on the trip several times. And one of the later trips she went on, she was packing the night before in a hurry, And the students always had to leave the day after finals ended. So they were up studying for finals, and they were bleary-eyed, and they were packing that night, and they were in a hurry, and she was doing all that. And she had a stack of the skirts that she was going to wear. She told me this later. I wasn't there. I didn't see this, but she told me she had a stack of skirts that she was going to wear. And she just forgot to put them in her suitcase, in her duffel bag. And so she came without anything that way. And so she had a bit of a crisis. She had to think about what she was going to do, and I made a point of stopping at a Walmart so she could go buy some clothes. And she came back and she had decided to buy pants because they were cheaper, and she felt she had sort of a dispensation. But that particular woman wore culottes a lot. And culottes, which I found out a lot about from her because she was freely discussed all this stuff. Culottes are shorts which are tailored to look like a skirt. And that's how she handled this. Anyway, and she wore skirts a lot too, and dresses a lot. Anyway, we don't need to go into all my stories about the Western Church, but it's still...
Rich, there is, or was until, I don't know, a few months ago, it could still probably be that way, but there's a church in Dubuque that all the women have to wear skirt dresses.
Yeah, and they don't cut their hair either, so they wear their hair long.
See, they're very, very traditional,
Yeah.
Yeah.
very conservative.
Yeah, every like,
Every day,
like in the winter, they will wear the skirts, but then like they'll have like stretchy pants on underneath
Yeah, for warmth.
for warmth, right?
Which makes
And then
sense.
the skirts on the outside.
it's also kind of fun because that same church, they're usually fairly popular, and then we drive right by them after our church and going home. And there's usually a group of, I don't know, 9 or 10 people across the road smoking.
Yeah.
From the same church.
Yeah.
From that same church. So they take all people, and you're not allowed to smoke on the property.
But there's nothing in the Bible about smoking.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not a thing.
No, so there's, that was kind of fun. Like, oh,
Yes.
all right, smoke for it.
So here's an example in Colorado City, Arizona, which has changed recently, but was a polygamist Mormon town for a long, long time. And I was there when it was a polygamous Mormon town, wandering around. And these are a couple of plural wives, and they all wear skirts and dresses all the time. They're very traditional, very, very conservative.
You're out of time, buddy.
I'm out of time. And we're about to get into the Mormons and do the Mormon underwear and the clerical collars, which we didn't get to. If you want, I can do that as part 2.
Part 2. Yeah, part 2.
So we'll do that. But now's a good time to stop. So thank you for your attention. And any comments or final questions or discussion? I knew this was going to be really long. I just didn't know how far we'd get. So.
Yeah.